Water counts!
Dudes, dudettes, let me just say right off the bat, I cannot wait until we hit that reset button and start Warhammer 3 fresh. And trailers like this do not help. I've never disliked the game, I've spent an enjoyable 300 hours on it so far and will spend many more regardless, but my lord, does it feel good to see evidence of the combined campaign we're all waiting for. And in an epic trailer no less, kicking off what should be a very exciting week with the Skulls for the Skull Throne event. Reveals for all kinds of Warhammer shenanigans, from Darktide to Space Marine 2 and Total War, all on the docket, all incoming today, and lots more soon after. But this video is all about Immortal Empires and a trailer that was potentially going for some Age of Empires 2 Age of Kings vibes. Remember when the two lords in that game were playing chess with knight charges and trebuchets at the start? One of my favorite openings from any game in the last 25 years, and seems like there was maybe a little bit of emulation going on here. Maybe not CA's punchiest or most impactful reveal ever, perhaps a bit lacking on the OST side compared to Vampire Coast or the Grim and the Grom, maybe a bit cheap looking and derivative with the images of the chessboard, but overall, gorgeous cinematic shots throughout, the Cathayan army battling the undead under the glow of Manslib, a combined Nurgle and Skaven host assaulting a Bretonnian castle, and an Imperial army ambushed by the Dark Elves, with Karl Franz spinning out his most iconic line. It's always nice to see old friends. Now it appears nothing has changed in terms of the time horizon for release. Quarter 3 of 2022 could mean any time from July to September. I personally think this will all fall somewhere in August, but not much point speculating there. It could be anywhere in a 2.5, 3 month gap. So while the trailer hit all the right notes for me, instead of breaking it down frame by frame to try to glean info for content we already knew was coming, I want to discuss something of actual substance, and that is the campaign itself. In particular, start positions, new sub-factions, legendary lords, and how that will all tie into the Champions of Chaos DLC and Chaos Dwarfs by the end of the year. Now, as the cinematic explicitly stated, the first rendition of Immortal Empires will be classified as a beta, and as expected, when the wave of backlash about CA's timeline broke a month or so ago, some of us fixated on that phrasing. And while some pessimism on this front is more than warranted at this point, I do believe people are getting a bit hung up on the terminology here, essentially arguing that this beta will be unplayable and not worth our time because of the nickname affixed to it in the front. Which is entirely possible, of course. It may indeed end up being a true shit show of a beta, but to an extent, I think the argument misses the point and the reality of Creative Assembly's situation. CA are calling this a beta to emphasize the ongoing nature of its development, right? That it's still very much a work in progress and likely to minimize some of the drama that could occur should problems manifest themselves early on. Will it be buggy? Yeah, I don't think there's any question about that whatsoever. It's literally the biggest strategy map ever. The scope of the combined campaign is absolutely enormous. It is going to have issues. You need to go into it realizing that. But this is going to be a soft relaunch. They know that if the initial impressions for IE are terrible, how problematic that will be for their future, not just for the Warhammer series, but for the company as a whole. That it could be the final nail in the coffin for the trilogy and severely constrict what they're able to do in terms of DLC and future content moving forward if they aren't able to recapture the market share they've lost. Which means this first iteration, beta or not, is going to be a huge deal. It's going to have a ton of resources, time, effort, and energy put into it to ensure that they put their best foot forward when it launches on day one. Which is why we're waiting so long right now. That is literally the reason why we are in this gap at the moment. And in this case, the launch will be with a sandbox mode that people desired from the very beginning. So while it's undoubtedly a massive undertaking, and there will be flaws, there will be problems, it is very likely initial reception here will be quite a bit better because it will be an absurd amount of content with stuff we know the community actually wants. A big-ass map with a sandbox campaign with all your favorite factions back in action. So in terms of the nomenclature involved with this initial build, remember the first stage of Mortal Empires in Game 2, where turn times were 5 minutes long, and content was vastly inferior to what would come 2 or 3 years later. That wasn't called a beta, but if you look back on it now, you would absolutely consider it one. My point here being, you can call it whatever the hell you want till the cows come home, but until we actually see what state Immortal Empires is in when it launches, it doesn't really mean anything. It doesn't really tell us anything, and I do not have this pessimistic outlook that it will be a trash, unplayable dumpster fire of an experience, or even that there won't be any reason to try it out, that it somehow doesn't count just because it's being called a beta. Because every time something's gone wrong with the series, and there have been plenty of moments like that, they've come back and delivered something awesome to make up for it, and that is what I am expecting here. So when it comes to Immortal Empires, there are a couple points I want to drive home right at the start. Variety and replayability are the two major elements Creative Assembly want to emphasize with a campaign like this one, so invariably, there will be some significant changes coming on day one. For example, there will almost certainly be a massive shakeup when it comes to start positions. Remember, the map is expanding dramatically in this final game of the trilogy, which means more landmass, regions that were cut previously returning once again, and lots of new areas to fight over. Marching hand in hand with those changes will be a diaspora of characters to ensure that each lord has a logical place to begin his playthrough, while also breathing diversity and variety into the campaign at large. That means I'm expecting potentially dozens of characters to move starting locations. Whether that happens at the outset of Immortal Empires or as things progress and factions continuously get updated, I do not know, but I will say that many of them will need to be moved initially because there will be gaping holes on the map without much going on otherwise, and you don't want lots of dead zone in a campaign experience like this one. As a part of that, many of the lords that currently share a start will need to be split off to their own unique home bases so they can populate that map and fill in where they are needed. We've been trending towards sub-factions and unique start locations for a very long time now, so all of that should line up with this expected diaspora of characters, evidence for which we actually already have, and we'll talk about that more in a moment. Along that same line of logic, rift jumping or sea lanes need to be a top priority for the dev team for reasons we discussed after the initial Warhammer 3 embargoes. My biggest concern for Immortal Empires is about distance, making it impossible to experience much of what a combined campaign of the scope should truly offer. And so being able to traverse west by going east and east by going west, circumnavigating the globe, or simply rift hopping through demonic portals to get to new areas of the map must be a major feature here, or many of the benefits of this new campaign will simply be lost right from the word go, right at the outset, and that's not what we want. But considering there will be no narrative in IE, and the community has already expressed their distaste for demonic portals simultaneously drowning all regions of the planet every 25 turns, I think sea lanes that simulate the time it takes to sail across the Great Ocean would be a more elegant solution to the problem, so that Dark Elves can interact with the Cathay, Lizardmen can interact with the Ogres, and so on, which has the double benefit of avoiding stupid situations like Malice Darkblade's Black Ark, just being stuck in a corner of the map, not doing anything. So, let's turn our attention to the specific lord situations that I believe will need to be updated early on in the Immortal Empires lifecycle. Thanks to Aquaman Gymnast for compiling this with the combined campaign map currently in the game files, and remember, this is what I expect IE will look like with Ind and the Hinterlands of Koresh being unplayable and inaccessible, but leaving the door open for those factions to potentially come later. There may be some slight alterations here or there from this map to the final one, but this is a logical Game 3 map, and it is coming from the official games file. So, in lieu of information we don't have, I think this is a fantastic working framework for what the final map will encompass. On screen, you can see a bunch of red circles that highlight particular areas of emphasis that are likely to change. So let's start with what we know for sure, and what we know is that Nakari is moving to Ulthuan, Clan Eshin is moving to Cathay, and we know that Albion isn't big enough for Rakarth, Nakai, and Be'lakor all at once, and only one of them is truly tied to the location from a lore perspective. I'm a bit up in the air on this particular point, but I think it's fair at this point to suspect that Be'lakor will be present as his own faction on day one of Immortal Empires. It's basically the olive branch to say, hey, sorry you guys didn't like the campaign as much as we wanted, here's a new lord to have fun with, go have a blast. And what this does is immediately solve the Albion issue straight from the word go. Be'lakor is going to start in the Citadel of Lead. We talked about that many months ago in our Be'lakor video. He will be on Albion. It just makes too much thematic and logistical sense not to move him there. So from there, Rakarth and Nakai can go basically anywhere they want, to the Southlands, Lustria, or the Far East. There is very little Lizardman presence on the eastern side of the map. Oxyotl will either stay where he is right now, or he'll get moved to the southern Chaos Wastes. But no matter where he is, he will be close to Chaos. he will be close to demons because he's all about killing them. So Nakai makes the most sense to either stay on Albion to fight Be'lakor if it will be large enough, or if the island is too small in IE to have two lords starting so close together, they'll probably move him east, either to the Dragon Isles or to the jungles bordering the south of Cathay, which then leaves Rakarth to plug up the hole in Western Lustria, where there are currently 0 playable factions, and it is looking very empty there, so something needs to change on that front. As for Nakari, the Grapening of Ulthuan will bear luscious fruit come this summer. We know for a fact, based on data mine game files, that he will begin his campaign in Krace. So if you're hoping for Korhil and the White Lions, get Reknerd. Does not look like that will be happening anytime soon, if ever. But the appearance of a Slaaneshi host on Ulthuan immediately creates some interesting possibilities that Korhil never would. Ulthuan has traditionally been incredibly safe, isolated, and prosperous when playing as Tyrion or Eltharion in Mortal Empires. You can use intrigue at court to confederate most other high elf factions by turn 100, and from there, once you rule the donut, you kinda just rule the world. Your economy and military snowballs out of control from there. High elves are one of, if not the most powerful faction in all of IE. Now, Ulthuan is in a much more compromised position, and a lot more pressure is being put on you straight from the start, because Nakari can vassalize, subjugate, and make loyal high elf factions, while also providing some cushion for Scourge of Cain to get on their feet as well in the early game and pressure the rest of Ulthuan. You'll have many more diplomatic options as Nakari here, because you're not being shoved into the corner of the map anymore. You're not in the Chaos Waste, where only Scarbrand is close to you. And now, from a lore perspective, this is right where Nakari belongs, and where his main rivals and invasions traditionally begin. As much as I love the rivalry between Slaanesh and Khorne, I think his rivalry with the High Elves, particularly Nakari's rivalry with them, is much more important, and I think this is a much more dynamic start location for the Keeper of Secrets. The other one we know for sure is that Clan Eshin is being moved, and as they have many more important ties to the Far East than they do to Pigbarter or the locations of the Darklands they were in Warhammer 2, and the fact that we've already seen them moved in Realms of Chaos, we know the Deathmaster has already been moved to the heart of Cathay, and that is also a much more logical and, in my opinion, more interesting start position for him to be in. Now, when it comes to the more adventurous Dark Elf Lords, I can already pretty much guarantee Rakarth is moving, but what about Lokir Felheart and Malice Darkblade? Lokir is all about his Red Blades of Ind and fancy expeditions to the Far East, so starting him near Ind, Koresh, the Dragon Isles, or Cathay all makes sense, as long as he has water to use his unique Black Arc. And because Game 3 is all about demons, and Malice spends all his time in the lore trying to break the curse of Zarkan, I expect we will see him in either the southern or northern Chaos Wastes, continuing his dual star position with Haggrafe still under his command. My vote would be the southern Chaos Waste here, because at least 2 or 3 lords should be moved there just to populate the new area, including Scarbrand, Kugath, and or Oxyatl, to make room for some of the other chaotic champions we know are coming soon. Remember that IE will also launch with that long-awaited Warriors of Chaos rework, and the 4 chaotic champions, hinted at in the blog post, and we're going to have to find start locations for them as well. So, with that in mind, let's talk about Chaos. Archaon, Sigvald, and Kolek will need some reworking to bring them up to modern times alongside the WOC in general, and will likely become their own unique sub-factions to help populate the holes on the map. We're effectively doubling the size of Mortal Empires here. There are going to be a lot of spaces that need new Chaos threats, and I think it would make sense to move some of them out of Norska and the edge of the Chaos Wastes into more interesting locations, although I'm not sure exactly which exotic locations they should be sent to, if any. They might still start in the same spot, they might still be part of the same horde, but pretty much anytime we've gotten a racial rework, they've been made into new sub-factions with those legendary lords, so that's what I'm expecting here as well. Which then begs the question, what happens with those 4 champions in the Chaos DLC? Well, literally 5 months ago I talked about who I think they will be, and it seems we've reached a general consensus that it will be Festus, Village, Valkia, and a Slaaneshi character like Strikar, Dakala, or Azazel. You can really put Festus, Village, and the Slaaneshi champion anywhere. I imagine they'll be spread throughout the globe. Jungles of Qian would make some sense for Champion of Tzeentch in the Far East, That's where Kairos Fateweaver is putting all his pressure. They might try to link up the Tzeentch characters, or they might try to completely separate them, which I also think makes some sense. So yeah, you could put him pretty much anywhere. He's all about teleporting and going wherever he wants. Volkia has an end times rivalry with Ludwig Schwarzhelm, so you could put her in the Empire, maybe at the Brass Keep, or in the Waste near Nagaroth, which is the site of her end times invasion. She first runs into the Dark Elves, and I believe she razes Nagaron to the ground. But no matter what happens, Chaos will have an absurd amount of start positions come the combined campaign. And it'll be important that they're putting pressure on the Order races wherever they are, so it's not just coming from one side, it'll be pretty much everywhere, as Chaos is somewhat ubiquitous in Warhammer lore. Now in terms of obvious changes to make, Tretch should head to Crookback Mountain. I expect that will happen, and looking at this particular map, the Galleon's Graveyard is not in the right spot. It should be moved up to the northwest, nor is Clan Moors, which will be further north, southwest of Karak Azul, unless Queet gets moved in Warhammer 3. And then there's the Splinter factions to consider, that people have long discussed moving locations, and just by nature of how massive this campaign is going to be, it's bound to happen sooner or later. It might be later, just based on the scope of the changes required, but it will still happen at some point. Volkmar for the Empire, Grombrindal for the Dwarfs, and the Vampire counts are the big offenders here. Vampires need it more than any of the others, I think. I think you probably get away with keeping Gromby and the Volkswagen where they are, although not ideal from a variety perspective, but the Vampires need some big changes. So at worst, when Neferata and Nagash come, they need to get their asses moving, alongside whatever undead rework they receive too. I'd prefer they delete him from the game outright. My god, what a trash lord, but Helman Gorst needs to go somewhere else, preferably to a godforsaken corner of the map so I never have to see him again. But Vlad and Manfred are the big question here, and I think the answer is obvious. Having all these Vamps begin their campaigns in Sylvania with functionally the same start positions kinda sucks. So there should be only one ruler there, and while alive, we know who that ruler should be. It's Vashanesh, Mr. Vlad von Karstein. Drakenhof is his seat of power, give it to him. And then Manfred can go elsewhere. And this one is easy. Directly from his army book entry and lore, through sheer ambition and willpower, Manfred accumulated all the spells from the lore of the vampires and lore of necromancy after spending the better part of a century collecting the forbidden knowledge from the sand-encrusted libraries of ancient Nehekara. Give him a desert start location, and Manny Fresh should have a super unique start, reading them books of Nagash and competing with the Tomb Kings for supremacy in the deserts of Yore. While Neferata will of course begin her playthrough in Silver Pinnacle, near the northwest corner of the Darklands, which will naturally be inhabited by the Chaos Dwarfs coming soon TM in November or December. I don't really know where to put Volkmar or Gromby. I'd kind of have to see where everybody else is to get a better picture of where things should be plugged in, and they might not get moved at all, which would be fine if they remained as part of their main factions. I don't think it needs to happen for literally every single lord in Mortal Empires, but it needs to happen for a lot of them, and I think so far the ones we've listed are the ones that make the most sense to change, and it should, if all those changes happen, make for a very dynamic, interesting, and exciting combined campaign map that a lot of people are going to want to play, because some fresh start positions and more sub-factions will go a long way in making Immortal Empires feel new and exciting and fresh once again. It is going to be insane, guys. It sucks that we've had all these delays and disappointments, but I truly do believe the ship will be righted with this combined campaign. I think a long gap here is going to do the game wonders, even though it sucks that we're not getting tons of new content on a bi-weekly basis like I feel like we should, and that we'll have many years of support and an awesome experience with Warhammer 3 moving forward. It will just take longer than many of us would have liked, and that's just something that I think most of us have probably come to grips with at this point. Hold on to your butts, people. Plan is to upload a Darktide video around the same time this goes live, and then depending on what exactly is revealed for Space Marine 2, we'll be talking about that in depth as well, and whatever really interesting reveals might be unveiled during Skulls for the Skull Throne. So, should be a wild week. Hopefully gonna get some Darktide gameplay in too soon. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you all in the next one. Indie Pride, signing out for now. Have a good one, guys.